Pick up any iconic American product from a half-century ago, turn it over, and you'd likely see a proud little stamp, made in the U.S.A. It was a guarantee, a statement of origin and quality. Today, you're more likely to find a stamp that says, "Assembled on Earth by a guy named Dave." Maybe. The truth is, some of the most distinctly American brands, the ones woven into our culture, our childhoods, and our living rooms, haven't been made here in decades. Let's take a little road trip through the graveyard of American manufacturing, starting with the very pants you might be wearing right now. Levi Strauss & Company, founded in 1853 during the California Gold Rush. For over 170 years, they've been in business selling the rugged, tough-as-nails American dream in denim form. Nothing says cowboy or rebel without a cause. Quite like a pair of Levi's 501s, right? Well, saddle up. Because those jeans have a passport with more stamps than a diplomat. In the mid-1990s, Levi's employed around 37,000 people in North America. But as fashion trends shifted, and the allure of cheap overseas labor called, the dominoes started to fall. Plant after plant was shuttered. Finally, in late 2003, Levi's closed its very last American manufacturing facilities in San Antonio, Texas. The year they finally moved all their manufacturing overseas. Okay, so we've lost our pants. But what about our childhood wheels? Take the radio flyer, the iconic little red wagon. If you didn't scrape a knee falling out of one of these things, did you even have a childhood? Founded in 1917 by Antonio Payson, Radio Flyer built its legacy out of a sprawling factory in Chicago. For 87 years, they stamped out the steel wagons that carried our imaginations, our groceries, and our lazy neighborhood friends. But eventually, the cost of American steel and labor got too heavy to pull in 2004. Radio Flyer shut down its historic Chicago manufacturing plant to outsource production to China. While the final layoff was relatively small, cutting the last 50 or so manufacturing jobs at the plant, it was the end of an 87-year era. The wagon was still red, but it was no longer built in the Windy City. Speaking of wheels, how about the Huffy Bicycle? The company traces its manufacturing roots all the way back to 1892. If you grew up in the late 20th century, there's a good chance your first taste of sweet, two-wheeled freedom was on a Huffy. For decades, their flagship plant in Salina, Ohio, pumped out over 1 million bikes a year. But then came the 1990s, and the rise of the big box store. Retailers demanded rock-bottom prices that an American factory just couldn't match. Despite union workers taking pay cuts to try and save their livelihoods, the math was broken. In 1998, after over a century in business, Huffy closed down its Salina plant. And by 1999, it shuttered its remaining U.S. facilities. Over 1,600 American factory workers were suddenly left pedaling past the unemployment office as production shifted entirely to Mexico and China. And it wasn't just bikes and wagons. If you grew up any time after 1960, you probably had an Etch A Sketch. You know, the red plastic screen where you could draw a masterpiece. Unless you sneezed, or dropped it, or your little brother aggressively shook it to erase your poorly drawn staircase. The Etch A Sketch was manufactured by the Ohio Art Company, a business founded way back in 1908. For decades, after 92 years of making toys in America, the Ohio Art Company announced it was moving production of its signature toy to Shenzhen, China. As long as we're looking at toys, we have to look under the Christmas tree. For a century, nothing said. Christmas morning in America, quite like a Lionel train, chugging around the pine needles. Founded in 1900 by Joshua Lionel Cowan, Lionel literally built the childhoods of millions with their heavy metal, smoke puffing, electrical marvels. For over 100 years, through world wars and the Great Depression, these trains were stamped with pure American grit, primarily rolling out of massive plants in New Jersey and later Michigan. But even the self-proclaimed standard of the world couldn't outrun the corporate conductor calling for cheaper labor. In 2001, after over a century of domestic production, Lionel packed up its caboose and officially shipped its manufacturing off to China and Korea. They shuttered their Chesterfield, Michigan plant, derailing the livelihoods of hundreds of American factory workers. Today, the trains still whistle, but the American hands that built them have been left at the station. So, what actually happened here? If you read a corporate textbook, you'll hear polite, sterile phrases like globalization, supply chain optimization, free trade. You'll be told it was all an inevitable evolution, done as a favor to you, the consumer, so you could buy a t-shirt for $4. But let's pull back the curtain. Was it just market forces? Or was it just old-fashioned corporate greed? Starting in the late 20th century, a new religion took hold in American business: shareholder supremacy. The quaint idea that a company had a civic responsibility to the town that housed it, or to the workers who built its empire, was tossed right into the shredder. It was replaced by a singular, ruthless goal: maximize profits for the next quarterly earnings report at any human cost. Some economists and critics call it a form of corporate fascism, a system where giant multinational corporations and government policymakers locked arms to write trade deals that protected the boardroom while completely gutting the factory floor. The result wasn't just cheaper toys and TVs. It was a massive, unprecedented shift of wealth. These soaring corporate profits didn't trickle down. They were rocketed straight to the top 1% and the major shareholders. And what about the middle class? The people who used to make a comfortable living wage building those televisions and bicycles. Well, they were sold a revised version of the American dream. Since wages were stagnating and the good factory jobs were disappearing across the ocean, there was only one way for the middle class to keep up the appearance of prosperity debt. We swapped paychecks for plastic. We traded stable livelihoods for cheap, imported goods bought on credit cards. It was, depending on how you look at it, a brilliantly sinister scheme. Keep the products cheap enough to buy, but keep the people just indebted enough that they can never stop running on the treadmill. A fabricated dream, financed at 19% APR. Levi's radio flyer Huffy, the Etch A Sketch Rawlings AMC cars Zenith. Just some names in a much longer, much heavier book. These companies didn't just make things, they made towns. They made middle-class lives. Today, the brands survive. You can still buy the jeans, the wagons, the baseballs, and the TVs. But the stamp on the back has changed. And with it, a massive piece of the American landscape.